Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. Today we're talking about the sporting heart, the athlete's heart, cardiovascular stuff. It gets heavy, but beyond that, how are you doing?
I was going to say, this is a heart-centered episode, but not in an emotional way.
I was trying to come up with something like, for my love, we're going to talk about it, but I didn't come up with that.
Well, it is kind of for me, basically, because I feel like we've now seen a lot of, I was going to say mostly men, but a few women, too, that we know, and in the pro peloton, run into heart issues as cyclists. And I think it's a terrifying topic, but one that we've really been trying to find an expert to come on and discuss. So I'm really excited that we finally found someone who was up for chatting about
That's right,
this.
and very experienced. So we'll get to that and everything that's wrapped up in that. I will say that it's hopeful. The message I left feeling hopeful, as much as sometimes we do have these conditions, with the spoiler alert is that like cycling is not bad for you and often is not necessarily causative as much as it is maybe showing us that we have an underlying condition. Or that it might have happened in any case. So we have lots of tools and red flags to look out for. But before we get to that, we have a number of events that we're coming into.
Yeah, I feel like this is, I think we said at the beginning of the year, we were really excited about the community aspect of 2026, the potential. That was sort of one of our resolutions. And I'm pretty proud of us for actually following through with that. We've got a lot of events coming up. So most pressing, we have the Enduro here at Highlands Nordic that's being put on by Collingwood Off-Road Cycling, a group that we are very much involved in. So that's going to be a really fun event. We're going to be there with a tent for Strong Girl Publishing. That one's coming up. If you're looking for a very fun, very chill intro to Enduro, I'd say this is a great one. We'll also be at Ontario Mountain Bike Provincials coming up here in early September.
Mm-hmm. And there's going to be a Shred Hers event again this year. They're going to run it in parallel. I think it's on the Saturday. They're doing Short Track Friday. Then they're doing like pre-ride, this girls event, basically, they call Shred Hers, which is great and fun. There was something else, maybe a team relay on Saturday. And then Sunday will be the XC event. And it sounds like there's going to be some top level racers there, but there's categories for everyone. So We're excited for that. And then from there, we in our preamble, we're preparing for this episode. Believe it or not, we do prepare. We're going down to New Jersey, and you're one of the top billed speakers,
keynote speakers at Feisty Fest.
Yeah. So we've talked about this before, and this is a long weekend, a 3-day thing, I think.
Yep, 3 days of all different activities, from gravel riding to track riding to some pickleball to some running.
And I've heard there's Zwift's Kate Verneau is going to be there.
Celine Yeager of Hip Play Not Pause. Also, my good friend Erin Ayala of Scotty Sports Psychology, who we've had on the podcast.
Jam-packed bill.
Quite a few times. She also is now the Feisty Women's Performance Podcast host. She'll be there. I'm super excited to get to hang out with these ladies. Honestly, I'd be going even if I wasn't doing some speaking stuff at it.
And I believe it's pretty, like, you can do rides, you can not do rides. They're doing some track stuff, I think. Yeah, because it is in Emmaus where there is a track. I think it's a pretty flexible weekend depending on what you're looking for. So definitely people should check that out. We have said, it's maybe 8-9 hours, maybe less from the Greater Toronto area, the GTA. So it might be something that folks listening, but you might also just live closer to there and you can check it out in any case.
Absolutely. And then after that, cyclocross season is here. Cross is officially coming. We're going to be doing the entire Ontario Cup calendar. I think I don't want to speak too soon, but we'll definitely be doing some cool stuff at a lot of the events, if not all of the events.
Yeah, we're thinking a tent. So the athletes that we work with, really anyone's welcome, but athletes we work with, we'll have our tent set up for that and do maybe some pre-ride laps. And then we're hoping to get sort of a girls lap going as well, which we did at one race last year. So we're trying to bring that to more of the cyclocross races. So that's pretty hyper local, but we do know a lot of listeners are from areas that are near that GTA type area that a lot of these cyclocross races are based.
And I do genuinely think if you are within driving distance of Christie Cross in Ontario, it is well worth making the drive. If you just like the idea of coming up to Ontario and just checking it out, fall is really a good time in Ontario. It's pretty beautiful. So if you've been looking for a reason to visit Ontario, Christie Cross, I would say, is one of the main, one of my personal favorites.
And our local one, Highlands Cross, is on October 3rd. And it's, you could certainly it's on the Saturday. You could make that into a little gravel weekend excursion or something like that too. If you just came up for the weekend and checked out some of our gravel roads or something like this.
Absolutely.
Okay. So with that then, today we have Dr. Nigel Stephens. He is a cardiologist. He's been doing many things in that domain. He's for over 30 years. And so he's worked in a cardiac unit. Certainly his specialty is more in like angioplasty and sports cardiology. And I think it's important. We talk a bit about his sporting lifestyle in that he has been, done some very high level cycling. He continues to especially do track cycling, which I think is important that, like your doctor is also, has the same pastime, but also we might say, maybe is really into this thing that people are like, oh, is this damaging my heart or not? Right. So it's someone who is also walking the talk that it is a healthful thing to do, even though he also knows all about the heart and different conditions people might end up with.
Okay. So what do you two get into?
Yeah. So we talk around, what is the AFIB is sort of like the big one that often will come up. We talk a bit about a couple other conditions, but most of what we talk around is sort of this AFIB. And then sort of red flags we're looking for, things like chest pain and anything like this. If you're very affected, then you should go get checked out. Certainly, like if you have symptoms, and we talk about how cyclists sometimes aren't the best at going and getting help. We're used to enduring things and suffering through things. And so we can sort of explain it away, especially when you're something that's so central to you as your heart is going wrong. So we talk about that and the importance of getting checked out at sort of the first sign of these types of things. And then we also dig into from a couple different angles, just thinking about the idea that like, is endurance training actually like ruining your heart? And that's just not true, but we just try and he did a great job of sort of breaking it down and thinking about it logically, like the most number thing, like there's a lot of people that ride bikes and there isn't just people falling over everywhere. But we also talk about how and this was like the big takeaway for me, and I said I'd actually repeat this in the intro just so that we get it in there 3 times through the episode, is that when we do end up with symptoms, it's important that we also think about where the athletes come from. And we use my athletic background as very consistent from my whole life, but starting endurance training around 16, 17, 18, and then just like unbroken basically till now I'm 42, 43. And so there hasn't really been like big off periods, big injuries. I joke that I could have gone to law school and just stopped cycling, but I didn't, which financially maybe not the best idea, but cardiovascular may be good. And so he says that like when you have people who have had these breaks or just have started cycling later in life, there's often they have been inactive for periods. Maybe they had habits that aren't so healthful. So we have to be careful in that because they might end up with some of these conditions that, yes, cycling and exercise protects us against, but these people may actually have risk factors for something like a heart attack or something that you would assume that a cyclist doesn't. And then part of that then, which I was like, wow, this like goes so deep, is you can see how then some of these stories about cyclists having heart attacks and dropping dead get really complicated, where it's not necessarily the cycling that killed them, but maybe the cycling, the big exertion, the big marathon, maybe took that person who decided to go all in on a marathon in 3 months from now. And now the heart, it was not in the greatest shape. And then that heart had an issue with that marathon. So it's very, very complicated where it's like, it's not the cycling that did it, but the cycling might have tested the heart in a way. So complicated and scary.
So in that case, it is the hope that kills?
I don't know about that. Do you think so?
You hope you can finish the marathon?
Yeah. So again, we talk about when you want to look into these things, that would be like if you are starting to undertake. You see this in every waiver, and we call it the PAR-Q, right? Where you should go and get like checked out before taking on any exercise training program or something like that, right? So most times you'll have to check off that you're good and a doctor hasn't told you not to do it, but you should probably go and make sure that a doctor hasn't told you to do it. Or
all
not
right.
do it.
Good PSA, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll link to, Dr. Nigel has a couple YouTube videos that he's done with our friend Phil Cavell, who will be on the show here soon with a new book around his book. What was his book? Was the
Cycling Addiction? But he also had the Midlife Cyclist.
The Midlife Cyclist, which a lot of folks really, really liked and got us sort of into this. He talks a bit towards heart conditions, and Nigel's in the book as well. And so we'll have Phil back on, but Phil had recommended Nigel as the person to talk to, and I think it really delivers.
Perfect. Okay, without further ado, let's get into this. And remember, this episode is not intended to diagnose any underlying medical
that's
conditions.
probably good too.
Please see your doctor if you have any concerns. All right, let's get into it with Dr. Nigel Stephens.
Welcome back. We're here with the Consummate Athlete Podcast, and I'm very excited. Finally, we have Dr. Nigel Stephens here to talk all things heart, athletes' heart, cardiology, cardiovascular conditions. We're going to try and cover a little bit of this and hopefully get to some of the topics that I know our listeners have been asking. So, Nigel, thank you for being here today and trying to unravel this complicated and scary topic with us.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to talking.
And I thought, a place I always like to start with the fun stuff. So maybe you give us, I know you've done a fair bit you've been very accomplished as a doctor, but on the bicycle, you've done a lot of cool things. So maybe just give us like a brief, you as a cyclist, what are you up to? What have you done?
Sure. So my sort of sporting career has had three phases. When I was a teenager and young adult, I wasn't good at a lot of sports, but I was naturally good at cycling, probably because I'd spent the money that my parents had given me to buy the season tickets to go to school. Instead, I was going 10 miles there, backwards and forwards from school from the age of 12. So I sort of, without really thinking about it, was naturally good at cyclosport. And that continued up until my 20s. But when I qualified as a doctor, it was very much a part of the long hours culture in medicine. And so I didn't have the time or the energy to train 20 hours a week. So I switched to running. I ran for Highgate Harriers, doing mainly cross country, and did a few marathons and so on. And then I broke my back. And then this is in my late 30s. And I came back to cycling. And although I wasn't as good as what I had been, I was in relative terms a bit better than people of a similar age. So I did a variety of cycle disciplines, time trialing, road race, criterium racing. The thing I was good at was track racing. I won maybe more than 100 fish and chip type races in track leagues. Got a national jersey in points race. Got European podiums in various track disciplines. And so I've sort of carried on bashing on at that.
Excellent. Quick question. Fish and Chips League, would that be like, we say beer league in Canada for more for hockey?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So a pretty universal term.
We're getting to the important questions.
British club cycling is a fish and chipper.
Okay.
That means a race that nobody, not even your wife or parents, care about.
Okay.
But constitute the background of cycle racing.
Okay. That's sort of like our beer league for hockey. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. Well, we got that one out of the way. Okay. Well, I like that framework because a lot of the athletes I've worked with, this is not common, I don't want to say, but I was trying to do sort of like a brief bit of research. And I would say in the masters athletes that I work with, which is a good number and have worked with over the years, I would say probably maybe 5%, 10% maybe end up with something. And I've never had someone who's just, you can never ride or train again, but over the years they end up with, something, an arrhythmia or some condition, something different, a flutter, they call some of these things. So we'll get into some of those conditions, but do you think that that's like a fair assessment of if you continue doing this, or just even for people is that what the numbers look like?
Well, I think if you're implying that continuing to do sport beyond your 30s is a causative factor, I mean, that's quite a hot topic.
I don't know that I'm saying that. You can say that. I'm not going to say that.
Well, it is. I mean, I think it's fair to say that atrial fibrillation in masters athletes occurs 5 times more commonly than sedentary folk. So
okay.
I think that one's
and that seems like,
clear.
Is that the most common, would you say?
Well, I think I would struggle to find other things where I would judge that in the way that participation in the sport was responsible or causative. So I for quite a lot of other things, I would flip this around.
Yes.
And say that, of course, nothing's a panacea, but it can be protective. And I've got a couple of people that really stick in my mind as a sort of human example of the protective thing. And there was one man who was a keen club cyclist, a member of one of the traditional Essex cycling clubs, is out on the club ride and sustains cardiac arrest and falls off his bicycle, and he's sort of dead by the roadside. And his teammates do bystander CPR. And then the ambulance arrives, air ambulance. And then they said they shocked him out of his abnormal heart rhythm, and he was still pretty unwell. And it was clear he was having a heart attack. So they then took him to the wrong hospital and then packed him back into the air ambulance, took him to the correct hospital, where they then did an angioplasty and treated his blocked artery. And you would think with all of that, with bystander CPR, delays, etc., that he would have ended up with a damaged heart, even if he was still alive. And he came to see me and said, "Can I go back on the club run?" And what was so striking was that you couldn't detect anything had happened.
Really?
Yes.
And so is that like redundancy as all these vascular, like other ways the blood's getting around, or just such a capacity? There was so much oxygen and blood moving?
Yes, you can float a lot of ideas.
I'd like to do that, yeah.
Okay. So there's a very distinguished cardiovascular scientist called Derek Yelland, and he described a thing called ischemic preconditioning. And the concept of ischemic preconditioning is that if you restrict the blood supply to the heart muscle repeatedly, you change its biology such that it becomes resistant to dying when the blood supply is obstructed for a longer period of time. So my starting point is that this was a real life example of what Derek was talking about. Every cyclist regularly makes their heart muscle short of oxygen, makes it acidotic, because it's the nature of it. If you go up a steep hill for a minute, that's what's happening. And so I think thousands of hours like that are a real life example of ischemic preconditioning. And this person whom I described is not unique. I've had other people come to see me after they've had a heart attack, after they've had appropriate treatment, and you're thinking, well, I'm going to be dealing with somebody who's quite significantly damaged here. And I'm often pleasantly surprised by the apparent resistance to damage that their heart had shown. And there are lots of, what ifs and but what about this type explanations for that. But if you're a cardiologist and you deal with a lot of people like this, the theme emerges.
Sure.
It's a real thing.
I sort of skipped my one question for you was there something in your life that got you interested in, this athlete's heart or cardiology generally?
Yeah. So my sporting and medical life were entirely separate. And I became a consultant cardiologist 30 years ago. And the hospital where I still work, Northwick Park Hospital, at that time was also housed the Olympic Medical Centre. And my friend and colleague, Greg White, who's a sports scientist, was really interested in setting up something to evaluate athletes and the question of heart disease, etc. And so Greg and I ended up seeing about 1,000 sports folk, not just cyclists, not just endurance athletes, amateur, professional, elite, some Olympians. And so I suddenly had this sort of not exactly an epiphany, but a sort of realization that the thing I found interesting in my hobby life was also intersected in quite a powerful way with what my professional life. Mm-hmm. And what I also discovered, certainly at that time, more than 20 years ago, is that this was really a complete, it was a virgin territory. Sure. And although a lot of people are doing it now, there wasn't just about anyone doing it then. And a lot of the things that Greg and I first observed in individuals have subsequently become described in a more epidemiological fashion, in athletic people. So it was serendipity that got me into it in the first place, but it's a very nice niche in my working life now. I do general cardiology, I do regular stuff, plenty of it as well. But I increasingly see mainly endurance sports people, not exclusively, and quite a lot of cyclists just because it's a community of connected people.
Yeah. Yeah.
With all sorts of things to do with their heart versus the thing they love doing.
Gotcha. Okay. That sort of lays our background then. So maybe we go in then and look at, what is happening. I've been exercising, training endurance now for almost 30 years as well. What's happened, with these consistent years of training. And for me, I've trained as a mountain biker at a pretty high level. What would you expect to my heart? Like, what are the adaptations versus, I don't know if we compare to like myself as if I just went into law and should have studied law and got into that and, not done all this biking stuff. What would be the difference then in those two hearts?
Yes. And what that also speaks to, I think, is why no matter how hard you practice, most of us won't get to the Olympics. So there's a genetic context of the maximum that you can attain no matter how smart you train. So I think maybe it's an obvious thing to say, but nevertheless, it's clearly true.
Like you're saying, you have a heart, it's this big, and then it's also can only possibly.
But there's very complex genetic background. So my friend Peter Clarkson, who's also a cardiologist, his PhD was looking at one of the very early candidate genes in army recruits, and he genotyped them.
Okay.
And saw them at their start, and then he saw them after they had trained, and they'd obviously attained different levels of aerobic capacity, and he had a powerful correlation with the genotypes. And this was many years before modern techniques of sequencing your whole genome.
Right. Okay.
So that's one, for instance. So there's a difference in degree of adaptation, right? That's number one. Number two, there's a difference in intrinsic capacity. So it's quite striking when you meet naturally talented endurance athletes and you think about heart rate. They will say, oh, my resting heart rate is typically 40. In fact, when I was going into the army, they said, why is your heart beating so slowly? And then, on the other hand, these same individuals will often have higher than average maximum attainable heart rates.
Yes.
So the person who can go from 40 to 180 has a 140 BPM range, which, all other things being equal, will be able to generate a bigger cardiac output than somebody who can only go from 60 to 160.
Neat. Okay.
So,
yeah.
So these are simple things, but they're also quite powerful things.
Yeah.
Next, the capacity of the volumes of the pumping chamber, the left ventricle, to enlarge. And I think we're all familiar with Miguel Indurain, very distinguished multiple Tour de France winner, extraordinary time trialist who could also ride up a mountain. And so his heart was described as a cor bovinum, an ox's heart.
Okay.
He had... I don't think this is any medical secret, I think.
Yes.
And now he's back at working on his farm. I'm sure he still has a cor bovinum. And this is partly the trainability, the ability of that heart to enlarge as a training response. And partly it's highly likely just born with a naturally larger pump than other people. So again, another quite simple thing. And then maybe a third thing is to think about blood vessels. So if you think about the difference between a person at rest and a person who's working as hard as they can in some endurance activity, quite a lot of the limiter is the ability of their blood vessels to enlarge, reduce their resistance, and therefore increase oxygenated blood flow to working muscles. So if you say, what about the person who is naturally talented and who has trained, I would predict you would see differences in their heart rate range, you would see differences in their cardiac volumes, and you would see differences in the capacity of their blood vessels to respond to the demands and fire more oxygenated blood to the working muscles.
Okay, I see that. And so that could affect, we could see how that could make you a Tour de France winner or not, despite maybe doing lots of training and being motivated. But I could also see that then influencing in the same way. There's these genetic factors, and maybe you could say nature versus nurture, the things we do in our life that then could also influence developing any of these other conditions we've mentioned, like an AFib type thing or something like that. So is that, did I interpret that correctly? That like these genetic factors, but also what you do then can then affect
Yes,
if you develop
genetic.
these.
I mean, it's true for almost all physical capabilities.
Right.
It's genetic, intrinsic genetic capacity, plus intelligent stimuli to create the adaptions.
Hmm.
I think the point I was just making is that not all of us will do an 18-minute, 10-mile time trial.
Yes.
Um,
Now, could I draw the
it's
conclusion that not all of us would have AFib despite training in a
right.
certain way?
Yes, but you're making what might not be an entirely warranted jump from, as it were, physiological adaptations to the demands of exercise to things which are adverse as a consequence of endurance training, particularly in people who've done it for several decades.
Hmm.
So, in terms of the atrial fibrillation, that may be genetically predetermined, but most people with genetic AF, it will manifest in their 20s and 30s, and it might not matter whether they're doing anything or nothing.
Yes.
They've got a faulty gene. Whereas endurance sports folk, particularly if people have given it a serious go for 30 or 40 years, it's completely unsurprising if they've got intermittent AF. It's super common.
Okay.
And the way that I would interpret it, and I don't know, wouldn't want you to take this as a sort of biological, definite, proven fact. We were talking about increasing volumes of the heart chambers, right? So your left ventricle is a muscular lump that is the main pump, and that will increase its volume, but that's got a lot of resilience, that it'll spring back. The left atrium collecting the oxygenated blood from the lungs is a different thing. Although it is still a muscular heart chamber, the muscle is super thin, a couple of millimeters.
Oh, wow.
But it also has to accommodate much bigger pumped volumes. And so the concept that a lot of people have, myself included, is that if you put thousands of hours of stretch into the left atrium, a bit like a balloon that's been repeatedly inflated, it will end up persistently enlarged. And if we look at the mechanism of atrial fibrillation, although still not completely understood, a powerful reason that it happens is simply an increase in the surface area of the atrium, which allows more capacity for these tiny microcircuits of electricity to form. So almost all endurance athletes with AF will have an enlarged left atrium. The bigger the left atrium, the more likely to have it. The bigger the left atrium, the harder it is to fix, however you're doing it with drugs or DC cardioversion or ablation, and the more adverse the prognosis.
Hmm. Now, how often would you see, since this is the most common, or I call it the most common one, it is a common thing that someone would come to you for. How often is this like you need to stop cycling?
Well, for the majority of people, you don't need to stop cycling. You need to be properly evaluated. And I mean, it's a complex sort of subject as to when you start treating it. You're having it 10 minutes once a year, that's premature. You shouldn't be starting to treat it. But when you cross a certain threshold of duration and frequency, you need to start treating it.
Mm-hmm.
You need other forms of evaluation as well. And there's a small subset of people where AF can be quite dangerous if they have very rapid conducting pathways between the atrium and the ventricle, so that the ventricle can go up to 250 beats per minute. And then you really need to say, okay, we need to fix this before you start exposing your heart to stimuli where you're having high heart rates. The vast majority of people, you should or somebody like me needs to evaluate them, make sure the heart is otherwise in good shape, make a thoughtful decision with that person, the point at which you start treating it, and if so, how you treat it, and whether you should give anticoagulants, blood thinning drugs or not.
Once you said there's sort of like this, it's 10 minutes a year or 10 minutes, whatever. It happens once a year or twice a year. Um, and you said maybe you don't need to treat, but in those cases, do you ever see that it's linked to like I really got amped up for this race and I took a lot of caffeine and I didn't sleep? Are these lifestyle factors often sort of tied in there from what you've seen?
When you're thinking about AF, you're thinking about the underlying propensity, and often that might be simply a long habit of athletic training. There may be other things as well. And then you think, what are the individual triggers that mean that at one moment in time the person is in AF and the next moment they're not? So for some people, it is adrenaline driven. I have a teammate who has AF exclusively during the 200-meter time trial of track sprinting.
Right, right.
For other people, it's the reverse. They won't get any during physical activity. They will often have it when they're lying down after a meal. So often at the times where heart rate is at its lowest, vagal tone is at its highest. And in those circumstances, it's almost the space between the normal heartbeats is greater, and it allows more capacity for the AF to start happening. And for a third group of people, it's random. It's some, you might in a sort of slightly sort of unhelpful way say it's sort of chaotic. There's some conspiracy of circumstances that's at one moment in time that gets the AF running.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and with regard to other things, alcohol is a cardiac toxin, and it's complicated because it's wrapped into our lives in other ways. But often the conversation I have with somebody who's come, the AF's got troublesome, I said, have you considered not drinking alcohol?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have one of the athletes I'm working with right now has just made that choice that it's not worth it.
And often it's quite an epiphany for people.
Yes.
I remember one person, quite well-known personality in our world, and I said to him, "No, you just need to stop." And he's, all the fancy nonsense about, the connoisseur's appreciation of, this, that, and the other. And in the end, he stopped and he said, "Oh, that was nice.
Yeah.
I don't feel, grotty in the morning, etc., etc." It was, kind of phrase. It wasn't an epiphany.
Okay. I wonder now, when we're thinking towards like the listener, is there like, you mentioned the person who maybe has it once is like, oh, my heart rate went a little high there, but then it doesn't happen for a year. What are the red flags? Like, I would imagine like a chest pain, shortness of breath, these type of first aid type things. But is there like a pretty quick list or that you sort of like say like, yeah, you should have been here before. Why are you not here? Why weren't you here a year ago, you dummy? Like, what's this list of things?
So we're making an assumption that the AF is occurring in an otherwise normal heart here. And part of the evaluation that the person should have, if they have AF, even if it's an infrequent sort of or a first episode, they do need a little bit of a look over to make sure there's nothing else going on.
Right.
Because then the list of red flags would be very different. But if you're dealing with a person who has solely AF, then red flags would include extremely high heart rates during the AF, north of 200. Red flags would be becoming very unwell during a bout of AF. So typically, if you have a healthy heart and you go into AF, you've got to go into the little ring and tap it out home. But some people collapse off the bike, some people black out. Again, adverse symptoms like that needs to be respected. We need to understand why that's happening. And I suppose the other is not exactly a red flag, but if the natural history of AF, slightly depressingly, is it starts rare, becomes common, becomes protracted, becomes incessant. And so one of the skills in cardiology is to work out at what point along that trajectory that person is. When do we start to intervene? So I suppose, if you wanted to pin me down, if the person's saying to me, look, every week, every few weeks, I'm getting a 30-minute bout, it's bothering me.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the point where I'd say, okay, well, I think we need to start thinking about how to treat this.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Okay. Um, and would you say, like, I guess that's again with the heart, like, I guess it's these things that are disruptive, right? Where you say shortness of breath, pains, really affecting your day, like you had to stop, you blacked out. These are like pretty obvious, but you could see how an endurance athlete, because we're all so smart, uh, sometimes we move on and
Yes,
carry on and push through.
I think it's because we're not smart. I
Yes.
think it's,
Sorry, that's the Canadian sarcasm. Yes.
oh, I see, I didn't know that it
Yes, no,
existed.
I get in trouble for that. I apologize. Yeah, sarcasm is not good. I apologize. Yeah. We're dumb.
So I think that in a way, what I mean by that is that it's very easy for being tough-minded and just finishing the session blends into being stupid because you're clearly feeling ill when you're doing something that you previously enjoyed. And so I think we all of us need to take a step back from what we're doing and say this isn't part of the normal discomfort of high intensity exercise. There's something wrong here. So we all need friends and we all need to be honest with ourselves as far as that is concerned. And one thing I would say to you is that chest pain would constitute a red flag. Atrial fibrillation won't give you chest pain. And if you have chest pain that's not the same as the normal sort of harsh breathing sensation, but a different type of unpleasant, deep-seated within the chest thing that's coming on with effort and relief by rest, that's a red flag. That needs to be understood.
Hmm. Now, I would expect that that type of stuff, like that sounds more like your traditional cardiovascular disease, which we would expect less frequent in an endurance athlete. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, yes, less frequent, but not. So being a sports person is not a panacea.
No, no.
You can still get all you can get all of it.
Yes.
And don't forget, there are some common types of heart disease which are not in any way related to lifestyle. You just get them, even if you've looked after yourself in an exemplary way.
Yes. Um, yeah, and I guess that's a tough thing to unravel, which you, I think, have been pushing back with, understandably, is that we don't know that it's anything related to the endurance exercise sometimes. Sometimes you have a heart attack or you have any of these other conditions, including AFib, and it might have not mattered or contributed or could have made it even better than it could have been. Maybe it would have happened 20 years before and been worse.
Yes, of course. I think on average, the habit of physical exercise is a powerful preventative thing for many common conditions, vascular disease, cardiac disease, dementia, etc., common cancers. So I don't want to negate that simple statement. I think however, there is a little bit of nuance in this. The best evidence we have around this type of protective benefit is much more smaller training volumes than a sports person would engage with. So you might say, for those sorts of protections I've just described, maybe 2.5 hours a week, maybe split equally between endurance and strength training. If I'm giving general medical advice to people, what can I do myself, doctor? That's the way I would frame it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to, compete, or even if you want to set a good standard time in, these challenge events, your training volume needs to be 4 to 8 times that. Now, it isn't at all clear that that ramp up in volume gives you any additional health benefits.
Mm-hmm. And it's also not clear, I guess, on it's one of these U curves, I guess, roughly, or maybe it's a J, I don't know, but there would
Well,
be.
I don't know whether it is. I
Oh,
don't know whether it is a U-shaped curve or whether the curve just flattens. I don't know. I think that's a
ah,
subject
yes.
of some debate, and it does seem to me that a lot of people have a very sort of polemic view about it. If you do more, you're gonna get
Yes.
this, you're gonna get that. And a lot of more perhaps in North American literature than in British popular science literature, you see this.
Hmm.
And a whole variety of observations that have been made about in masters endurance athletes' hearts are sort of hyped up as being proof positive of something ghastly being happening. So common examples would be enlargement of the aorta, short-term observations about considerable enlargement of the volume of the right ventricle, pumping blood to the lungs, elevation of biomarkers in the blood during endurance activity and whether they represent acute harm to the heart or circulation. So these sorts of things, I think, are maybe not overstated, doesn't quite say it. They're cited as evidence for a particularly strongly held belief that if you do too much, it's surely bad.
And I believe our friend, we both have a friend, a mutual friend, Phil Cavell's, in his first book, and I don't know that it was his quote, but it's something along the like, where are the bodies? I don't know if that it was actually you that said that, but
Yeah, I
someone
think
said
it is me.
yeah, there you go. It's a great
That
quote.
quote is me. Because if all this stuff is true, where are the bodies?
Yeah,
Because
like
if
why
I'm
aren't all
not,
the Tour de France guys dead? Yeah.
well, if I'm not seeing them,
Hmm.
I don't know who would be.
Yeah.
So I think elite and professional athletes who've engaged with huge training volumes over 10 years or more of their career may constitute a special case. It is quite striking, isn't it? When you read the cycling press, you'll often hear of somebody dying in their 60s who was previously, a sort of leading light and so on. I don't want to, and I don't know enough about the individual cases to sort of speculate.
Hmm.
But I think what we're talking about here is the vast majority of people with normal lives, jobs, etc., who enjoy endurance activity. And that's where my "where are the bodies" quote comes from, because I don't see them.
Yeah, it's a great one. Yeah, and I guess that's true. Like if you say that my example of the Tour de France is tough because those are also genetic freaks, I guess, in some ways, which could be positive or negative depending too. Yeah.
Well, I think if you so an interesting thing is to do with the theory of the central governor. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Yep.
Tim Noakes
Yep.
and so on. And the way that it has been bred out of certain creatures. So a racehorse can be made to run till its heart ruptures. A human cannot. The central governor, at a certain point, whether it's blood pH or whatever,
Hmm.
it says, okay, that's enough, chap.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess and then it sort of controls the damage to the body. And I have seen like with heat and stuff, it's sometimes when humans are motivated, they can push themselves, but in the vast
I think
majority of
you're absolutely right. I think environmental circumstances are tricky because if you have a higher capacity to do high intensity endurance activity and you combine it with ambient conditions with high humidity and high heat,
right.
you can certainly get malignant hyperthermia, and it is a rare but sad cause of deaths in endurance athletes. It probably is a genetic predisposition.
Hmm.
But of course, if you can go much harder, then you're generating more internal heat, and if you can't shed it, you're going to end up with a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the body, humans are wild. You mentioned something earlier when we were sort of just talking around the episode that I wanted to pull back or pull a string on and see where we went. And you said that it sort of mattered. Someone like myself has a training experience. I've been very lucky, very few injuries, very few disruptions from basically when I was 18 to 30, or no, sorry, now I'm 43. Very consistent, gradually building, mostly good versus my lawyer version of myself that I presented to you earlier, the parallel universe where I imaginary went to law school and didn't do anything for 20 years and then came back to cycling with all my money and bicycles and tried it again really, really intensely. And you said there's a difference there and we're not necessarily sure, but I wonder if we could pull on that.
Yeah, so, well, it's one of the precepts I use in medical evaluation. So if a person comes to me in their 50s and they've got a symptom they're bothered by, one of the first things I need to understand is what has been your habit of exercise for the last 30 years. Now, if that person has got a pretty consistent training history, I'm fairly conservative about the amount of evaluation I would do, partly just because of my real life experience. These people will rarely have vascular disease. It's not unique, it's not that they're completely immune, but it's much less common. Whereas a person who has not done anything of that sort for more than 20 years, say, first of all, they've not had any symptoms during high intensity activity because they haven't done any. But secondly, they've certainly been exposed to the adverse long-term health effects of a sedentary life. And with those folk, I am much more proactive at looking much more thoroughly because it often combines with crazy ambitions. Can I go from standing start over 3 months to do the Étape du Tour? And I'm thinking, well, maybe, but you're going to have to go pretty deep and going to have to go from no miles a week to a lot of miles a week. This will be a huge taxation on your physiology. So let's just make sure you measure for it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess in the same way you would think about that in my life, someone going very quick changes to the training plan, there's a risk of injury, of illness, burnout, whatever.
Absolutely. If it's true of the heart, it's true 10 times over with musculoskeletal things. And you see it perhaps a little bit more with runners. Everyone wants to run a marathon. Everyone wants to do it over 4 months, etc. Most of them will have, plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis, patella tendonitis,
Mm-hmm.
because it takes these tissues much longer to adapt to the strain you're putting them under.
So then in the case of this person who's coming back to exercise, which again, generally good idea to get back moving. It's never too late to start. What would you be seeing them for? And what would you be like? These are people who then end up do have a condition like AFib or something like that surface during this ramp up of the training, or what are you seeing these people and what are you concerned about with them?
I wouldn't predict seeing atrial fibrillation because that tends to be the product of decades of endurance training, a long-term stretch. I think what I'm more concerned about is the thing of which they're completely unaware, but is quite common. So simple things like hypertension, abnormal cholesterol profile, abnormal sugar metabolism, things like that.
Okay, I see. So you're saying that you're going to get these lifestyle conditions that I said exercise that protects us. We don't have heart attacks, but then you have someone who's now a unique person
Yes,
who has some of
exactly.
that, but now is also putting the heart under a ton of duress and stress.
Exactly. And so there's those simple things. And I would have a fairly thorough look at them in terms of cardiovascular evaluation. And so two common things sometimes both applied to the same person would be cardiac CT scan, and some of them would be exercise cardiac ultrasound, which tell us complementary things but give us a much richer understanding of what may be there, but is at the moment completely silent.
Okay. Maybe going from that, then when you do have someone like, I guess when we talked about sort of red flags, but for someone like myself, I don't have conditions. I'm getting into my 40s, don't have a lot of history in my family of heart conditions. Like, should I go and get screened? I've heard things, as you say, on the North American press that we should be getting these blood tests for markers and all this stuff. Like, should I be checking this out? When should I be checking this out?
Well, I return to the point I made a little bit earlier. I think if you've had a habit throughout your adult life of looking after yourself and doing endurance sport, as I said, I would be fairly conservative. I would be pretty simple-minded because doing a 100-mile ride is not going to be a huge stress on your system. But for a person who's not trained for 20 years, it's a huge cardiovascular stress and may well reveal things that were previously silent. So it depends on the context. That's what I'd say.
Mhm.
So with a person who's looked after themselves, if you're quoting yourself as an example, I wouldn't do very much. I'd talk to you, I'd examine you, I'd measure your blood pressure, I'd do some simple blood tests, do an ECG. Not sure I'd do much more than that. The evidence base is pretty weak. That anything else will yield you much more helpful information.
Okay.
The
So
person
you do
who
think I
is,
should go and see someone though, or what are you saying here?
I'm doing myself out of work here.
Uh, okay. So,
Don't no, I mean I don't, we're not doing a personal consultation because it depends.
yes,
There's a
of
lot
course.
more questions you need to ask. You need to understand about family history and things like that.
So you'd say that
Uh,
like the GP and just sort of like, watching for these symptoms and stuff, but it's not necessarily that like everyone in the populace should be going out and getting their cardiology appointment.
no, the evidence base for that is non-existent. And to take another common example, you can go to a private facility in the West End of London, pay 200 or 300 quid, and get a cardiac calcium score. And I have really, I'm sure everyone who does my job has lost count of the number of people who've come and said, look, I've got this abnormal calcium score. What are we going to do? And there is no evidence as to what you should do. There is no,
Right.
don't know. You end up giving commonsensical advice about good quality preventative care, but then you'd be doing that anyway, whatever that showed. So, so the evidence base for screening in healthy people, particularly people who look after themselves, is confined to a small number of things. Blood pressure, because high blood pressure causes no symptoms. Almost certainly measures of blood sugar metabolism, what they call HbA1c or fasting glucose, something like that. Probably cholesterol profile, certainly once you're north of the age of 40. And not related to what we're talking about now, but glaucoma, because that's a silent cause of blindness that's treatable, cervical cancer in women, and colorectal cancer in people from midlife and beyond. But beyond those things, the evidence that of the long-term health benefits of screening are meager and debated.
Okay. All right. So you go to your doctor, you get your physical and so forth, and your blood work, and watch for symptoms. I guess just to let's say I do end up, I'm racing and I start like I have 3 or 4 of these across a couple of months of races or big hard group rides or workouts or whatever. I'd go to my doctor. I think our systems work similar. I guess whatever you do and then you would go and then it would be like see a cardiologist at that point. What would that like as we start getting into having a symptom then?
Well, I think if you have a symptom and it sounds like it's coming from the heart, you need to see a cardiologist. And it gets much more straightforward if you do my job, leaving sport out of this, if the person comes with a symptom,
Right.
because then that guides you as to what tests you need to do to understand the cause of the symptom. And if the person has a symptom, well, you need to help relieve that symptom, and it may be the context of something that poses an adverse risk to them, and you need to mitigate that risk as well. So symptoms, it's much more straightforward. I think that the thing that's much more thorny to try and work out is what we do with people who have none. And the distinction I was making for you before is if the person's sedentary, they may not have symptoms because they don't know yet, because they haven't tried anything out yet. Whereas the person who enjoys sport will have had a symptom if they were going to have one because they've tested their system thousands of times.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. Okay. I want to ask these next questions. We've sort of covered this. You mentioned the curve isn't I love a good inverted U-shaped curve, and you said that's not what this is, I don't think. So fair enough. But I'm always curious with these people, my people, your people, where we get into these more is always better, harder every day, that gray area. Is there any evidence that, someone who has been pushing their intervals every day or is the person that's got to do 20 plus hours every week or else it's a bad week? Is there any evidence that this is predisposing us to these types of things?
There isn't evidence. No.
Okay.
Um, I think it's very much more an issue that a coach needs to properly address than a cardiologist.
Right, like your results probably are suffering, but you're not necessarily
Well,
getting
of course. I mean, if you want to talk about U-shaped curves,
I
there's
do very much, yes.
well, there's absolutely no doubt that there's a U-shaped curve for people, not so much who are training too much, but people who are recovering too little. And if you've got a job and if you've got a family and you're going 20 hours a week, you will be under recovering and you will have adverse performance as a consequence of that. You can't take the benefit of training.
Okay. What about, so we get this, I've been, or this person has been training like this, they haven't, then they move over to that second area we were just talking about where now we do have some symptoms that are heart, cardiovascular symptoms. They come to see you. Is part of that treatment possibly then that we look into either working with a coach or scaling back on some of that, what we might call like up into the extreme ranges of intensity and or volume?
It depends on the diagnosis. So people come to see me who've had serious blockage of the heart arteries. They may have had a heart attack. They may well have had angioplasty and stent, or they may have had a bypass. And they're saying to me, okay, so what can I do now? And it's an absolutely fair question because you think in a general sense that a return to physical activity is likely to have a long-term preventative benefit, but you also need to be just a little bit thoughtful about it. And so my evaluation is actually fairly simple-minded. I ask myself two things. Number one, is there evidence of cardiac damage? And number two, is there any residual obstruction of blood flow in the heart arteries? And if I can satisfy myself about those two, and they've had a good job, then with appropriate sort of build back, I mean, then there should be no limit imposed. I've got national masters champions whom I have looked after who've had angioplasty, who've had limit heart attacks successfully treated, etc. And they've gone back to very high level competition in safety.
Okay, I like that. Is there, getting towards the end here, but I just thought, we really like cross training, whether that's, running, biking, a mix of cardiovascular sports, but then also certainly increasing the amount of strength training we're doing. I have to think that, taking out a day of cardio, increasing strength training, we know that you mentioned that even just with the governmental recommendations there is part of it.
Absolutely.
Do you ever find that like that's something that you're trying to suggest people sort of like reduce the amount of number of days, adding in the strength training if it's not being done? Is there, I guess there's a general benefit?
Yes. I always preface conversations by saying I'm not a coach.
Yes.
But I follow up by saying the evidence for the long-term cardiovascular preventative benefits of strength training is at least as strong as the cardiovascular preventative benefits of aerobic training. And so I would say to the person, if you're doing it once a week, you're really just paying the guys coaching you.
Right.
If you're doing it 2 times a week, and particularly if you're doing it 3 times a week, particularly if you're sort of mixing it up, then you're getting real benefit in terms of long-term health and well-being of all sorts, and particularly for women after the age of 50, of course, prevention, reduction of the risk of osteoporosis, but vascular benefits, blood pressure benefits, and, not being a coach, I would also respectfully say, if you're not doing this, you'll be slowly losing the stuff that it's very hard to regain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all of that. From a cardiovascular perspective, would it make sense? I guess I'm sort of like pushing you on this, I realize, but to, again, dropping a day out of there, if someone just has been doing so much cardio, like, is there a situation where you would say, like, let's drop the number of days?
Well, So we've got to distinguish between things that I would judge to be beneficial in terms of cardiovascular health versus things that may be beneficial in terms of their performance.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, when I'm seeing people, I don't go into a great deal of granular detail about their training program, but I would be saying to them, a typical healthy looking thing to me would say you rest for one day, you train on the bike in various ways for 3 to 4 days, and you do strength training, and that needs to be proper strength training, not messing around with tiny handheld weights for 2 or 3 days.
Love it. Okay, I agree with that. All right. Did we miss anything? I know you had a couple of things to sort of frame this a little bit and keep us from going too far into this massive topic. Is there anything that we missed that we wanted to cover?
Well, the textbook of cardiology is quite chunky, and we've only talked about a couple of the things, and there's an extremely long tail of cardiovascular diagnoses, some of which were been completely fixed, some of which have been mitigated and not completely fixed, and some which are not fixable, where it is, for most people, still going to be beneficial to be a physically active person, but you need to get somebody who knows what they're doing to help you to do that safely. There are a very small number of conditions that we as cardiologists deal with where you've just got to say to that person, I'm so sorry, it's not wise to do it. And they're limited and they're rare, but it can be quite. I had a Gaelic footballer, so this is somebody who earns their livelihood, who had a condition called bicuspid aortic valve. And I had to say to this poor man, I can't frame it any other way. You're going to have to look for an alternative.
Wow.
You're just going to aggravate what's already a rather spicy situation.
And that's like a congenital condition, is it not?
Bicuspid aortic valve is a congenital abnormality where the aortic valve is made of two semicircles that open and close rather than three sort of segments that normally do. And the problem with that is that the blood flow through it is non-laminar. And so you get aggravated degeneration of the valve, and the adjoining tissues in the aorta above are also part of the abnormality, and they're structurally weak. And so the aorta enlarges as well. So bicuspid aortic valve is certainly, it's not a common condition, it's not super rare either. But if you're wanting to do sport, it ain't necessarily a no can do. This guy was quite advanced in his condition, but it needs somebody like me to really think about it with you.
Well, we're thankful there's people like you out there. We really appreciate the time today. We'll definitely link to your website. You have a great website with a bit of details there. And I know that you and Phil Cavell also did some videos as well around heart health, right?
They are, and I think they're on Phil's website. And I've also got a YouTube channel which includes some of the rather sort of extemporized conversations we had, which seemed to, a bit like the one you and I have just had, seem to sort of flow quite well.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate it. I've had such a good time. Thank you so much for being on the Consummate Athlete.
It's a pleasure. Very nice to meet you and talk to you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.